Welcome back to this edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio magazine that we put together at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. You can find archived episodes on our YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com and search Freedom and Prosperity Radio. And, of course, you can find us online at tertiumquids.org. Great information about upcoming Tuesday morning group coalition meetings and other things we're working on here in the Commonwealth. Our next guest is research fellow in financial regulations with the Heritage Foundation. He's Joel Griffith. Joel, welcome to Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you doing today?
Pretty well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We wanted to have Joel on because as we get closer and closer to primary season, you hear fewer and fewer Democratic candidates, because there are fewer and fewer, but they seem to be louder and louder on the almost on the King John mentality of, sending the sheriff of Nottingham off there to get the government's due from those wealthy people who are hiding in Sherwood Forest, the wealth tax. And I'm trying to remember if it was Elizabeth Warren won 2020th or Bernie Sanders who first promoted the idea of the straight-up wealth tax. How dare you be wealthy in our face? But how do you approach something like this, even as a researcher? Because some of them seem so ludicrous on their face, I wouldn't even know where to begin to research them because I can't even take them seriously. So God bless you for doing it. How do you do that?
It's really twofold. It's number one, it's countering some of the myths that the proposals actually embody. When Senator Sanders released his latest tax, you go to his website. He talks about how the growth of those at the top, the growth in the amount of wealth they have, is because of a this is his words, a quote, massive transfer from those who have too little to those who have too much, end quote. So right there on its face, that is a misunderstanding of wealth and how it's created. Mm-hmm. Morality aside of taking from one, giving to another, let's talk about where wealth comes from. And I think too many of our friends on the left, they have this notion that the amount of wealth in a society or the amount of income that an economy produces over the course of a year, this is somehow just some fixed amount. And all that we need to determine as a society or as a government is how to divide up that income or that wealth. And that's fortunately not how the economy operates. We actually have wealth is created. We can have more wealth or less wealth depending on government policies, but far more important, depending on how we combine capital with labor, with intellect and technology. And when you combine all those resources together, you end up with, in a free society, you end up with prosperity. And that's what we've been blessed with here, not by happenstance, but because we allow people to employ their skills mm-hmm. and their time and the capital that they've accumulated.
Well, we just finished celebrating and lost in the New York Times zeal for 1619. The real seminal 1619 anniversary, Joel, to most of us was the founding of the first representative republic in the New World. It was after the Jamestown colony tried collectivism, nearly starved to death, started to work in capitalist ways again, and then realized they needed some place of discussion for regularities and things like that, and they founded what is now called the Virginia General Assembly 400 years ago. But the beginnings of that is the near devastation of a colony detached from their homeland because they thought, we'll just live in this agrarian, everyone will share equally, and it didn't work out at all. And it is one among many of great examples of that idea of that there's some zero-sum amount of wealth. I think even the previous presidential administration looked at the global economy that way, as if the U.S. was wealthy, it was because Zimbabwe was poor. And it's decidedly not the case.
Yeah, and I think that we need to understand, too, if you look at those that actually have, if you look at for instance, the top 400 list that's published by fortune every year. Look at the people on the top of that list, and most of us recognize the majority of those names. We've got founder of Amazon, Jeff Bezos. I think most of us benefit day to day from, whether we realize it or not, from the services that he's provided through Amazon. It's transformed the way that we do commerce across the globe. Steve Jobs, creator of Apple, all the ways many of us have had our lives simplified, and the amount of leisure time that we have increased because of that technology. We've got Bill Gates that transformed the technology world starting back in the mid-1970s. It's because of folks like this that we're able to use their intellect and invest capital of others that we're able to make our lives a better place. And the numbers are actually showing that. And yes, if you look at the concentration of wealth, that has become more concentrated. I mean, there's those are the numbers, and these are reported by a multitude of federal agencies across the globe. But also look at how the average family is doing. And Senator Sanders and others, they like to say that the middle class is disappearing. Here's the ironic thing about that is the middle class is a percentage of the population. If you define it as those earning between $35,000 and $100,000 per year, that did indeed shrink from more than half of all households in the 1980s to just 41%. So it's shrinking. But we need to ask, well, why is it shrinking? Well, here's the number they don't tell you. The percentage of families that are earning in excess of that $100,000, that actually has increased. It's actually skyrocketed. If you look at 1990, that made up 20% of families. Now it's nearly 30% of families. The entire reason behind that middle class number shrinking is because people have actually migrated up into the higher income levels. That's something they're not telling us, and I think that's an important piece of information for people to know, and that's directly related to the fact that here in this country we have a capitalist system, which means people can accumulate capital and invest it. You know, people that have wealth, extreme wealth, they don't have that money for the most part in a bank vault or buried in their backyard or under a mattress or in some other vault at home. That capital is investing, meaning that it's yielding more capital. And the only way that capital creates more capital is if they're providing a solution to the needs of the marketplace, things that you and I demand. And that's what those numbers show. When you see families moving from one income strata to another over the past 40 years, that is a direct product of our capitalist system, and this is the very system that they're assaulting. So you tax wealth, and the Sanders plan goes further than Senator Warren's. His plan would actually tax wealth at the upper levels at 8% annually. If you do that, and you get the average investment return, let's say you can make 6 or 7% a year on that kind of wealth over the long term. If you're taxing it at 8, that means that you actually are eroding. You're eroding that capital base. And the politicians might enjoy temporary advantage because they're able to go ahead and point to the programs that they're temporarily funding from that. But over time, the entire economy suffers because you are spending what has taken years to accumulate, and we no longer get the benefit from the economic growth that capital would generate.
And that's the key. The key is when those with the capital to invest in, say, Joel Griffith's idea to start a chain of, dress shoe stores or something like, whatever it may be, if they think you're worthy of that investment, then you get the venture capital to start the firm. I truly believe, I think some of these government officials want to be the venture capitalists of record. And stop anyone else from mucking around in their social organizations, but not to get off of the field of that. You talk about generating wealth. Is it also fair to say, and I've run for brief times small companies. I run the radio station I'm at. And you realize that a chief executive officer of a corporation is not as easy as you think it is. Oh, he flies around in his corporate jet. It's a whole lot of grass on the other side of fence kind of argument where Bernie Sanders says, oh, this rich guy, he makes $10 million a year. Well, what does he do for that? He obviously creates some sort of wealth that the board of directors of this corporation think he's worth that compensation. What is he creating that does that? And what do you create on the other end of the economic spectrum? How unique are your skills? Because that really determines how well you get compensated in any economic landscape.
Yeah, that compensation to CEOs typically is related to the profitability of a firm, not always, but typically. And when it comes to profit, too, that word, it's as if it's become some sort of an obscenity.
Yeah.
But profit means when you're able to return your net income to shareholders in one form or another, that means that you've found a way to efficiently combine resources. And if you have millions of companies all across the country generating profits, that means that they are maximizing the output for the amount of capital and labor and skills that went into that. And labor shares in that. And look at economic studies over time. It shows the return of profits to capital, those that invested, and the returns of profit to labor. And that ratio has remained remarkably consistent over time. And what that means is that when you have businesses that are profitable, both the investors benefit, the workers benefit, and the consumers benefit. And that's what the payments to the CEOs recognize. They recognize that there are some that have shown a wonderful ability to combine those resources together to create that efficient outcome. And we all benefit.
And that's the thing that I think we forget about is sometimes the way companies are driven by employment. We all want a nice, peaceful job. I guess, we don't want to, go digging ditches or digging in mines, although many do. The argument Bernie Sanders has regarding immigration is, these are the kids that want to do their jobs the Americans don't want to do anymore. And yet I don't see that fact in evidence. I see, folks striking GM so they can get better pay for the jobs that they do there. But a lot of our technology, you mentioned the technology creating leisure time. When Bill Gates was first pushing his computers and talking about all the free time we'd have, the word free jumped out in my head because I knew that was going to be time I wasn't getting paid for. But also a lot of these technology companies, app companies, the digital solutions, they don't create the amount of jobs that, say, an automobile manufacturer did. But we also have to be willing to then understand that if we want American workers making, an American wage for some of the technology, it's going to be a little bit more expensive. I remember Ron Paul once saying in bashing Apple for making iPads in China, Ron Paul said, well, I don't know if a $1,500 iPad helps the American economy either, or $5,000, whatever the number was. And it's that balancing act of, the cost, what are we willing to pay for something versus, what we want to earn to make that something.
Yeah, and I think with something like that, I don't have a $1,500 iPad, but if somebody finds that adds value to their life, well, that's certainly their right to do so, and many have found value in that. I know for me, I've got my smartphone that probably overpaid for that as well, but I know that's simplified my life in a great number of ways, both with being able to communicate in my professional life and other businesses, my grocery shopping, ordering any items, the amount of time I save from shopping. To me, that device has brought amazing value. And I think a lot of the technology that has been produced thanks to our capitalist system, a lot of us don't even recognize the amount of time that it saves us. But if you look at numbers that Census tracks, looking at the amount of hours that people work each week, and over time, we become a society in which we are able to live a prosperous life without having to work the 15, 16-hour days that our ancestors had to work. And that's a direct result of the free market system that we have.
Well, is there also a thing going on, and maybe Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, 2020 are preying on this, and some of the other Democratic candidates are preying on the fact that our economy is changing. It's going through a period like it did in the beginnings of the 20th century in the Industrial Revolution, late 19th century as well. The beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, as we are still transitioning in the technological revolution. We don't know how far that's taking us, but it's also the natural evolution of the workforce. What do we do? What can I contribute that somebody will pay me for? That is changing as well, and I don't know if we're doing a good job for our kids of making all the different possibilities available, and I certainly don't think more regulated, government-driven economies are the way to do that.
No, well, yeah, I think you brought up an excellent point, and in our type of economy where people and businesses have freedom to maneuver, that means there are going to be changes, there are transitions, and people need to be educated with the basics that we're no longer teaching in many public schools, so that we can go ahead and shift as the marketplace develops. This is not just this issue of transition is not just one limited to blue collar work either. I'm a former lawyer, and you look at the way in which the legal profession is changing, and that's a white-collar profession. But as technology develops, that has the potential of forcing many attorneys to look for other ways to employ their skill set and their intellect. And it's the same way across the professions. But the worst thing that we could do would try to freeze the economy in place. I mean, this has been something that if you look at back as the agricultural era was developing, we had the cotton harvesters, and if you look at some of the old newspaper articles that were written back then, there was fear that employing that type of technology at farms would lead to mass unemployment. But the fact is, in an economy like ours, where people have freedom, yes, there's that transition phase where people in specific sectors, it is going to be painful temporarily, and that's true. But over time, we all end up immensely better off. And what we need to do is make sure that those that are going through our education system, when they graduate high school even, that they have the necessary analytical skills and comprehension skills to go ahead and take advantage of those opportunities as the economy changes. And unfortunately, a lot of our school districts, we don't have people graduating with some of those core competencies.
What do you make, and visiting with Joel Griffith, research fellow in financial regulations with the Heritage Foundation, one of our senators, our senior senator, Mark Warner, is one of the real crusaders to rein in. He's always talking about reining in the abuses of the gig economy and to, clamp down. And then on the local level, we see boards of supervisors going after Airbnb families because they charge the local hotels confiscatory room tax rates, and the Airbnbs are, quote, getting away without paying the same tax. Instead of thinking, hey, maybe we should cut the taxes on the hotels, they just want to go after Airbnb or Uber or Lyft. There are smear campaigns against Uber and Lyft and other instances in the, quote, gig economy. Is this something that is a great metaphor for what could come if we did more wealth taxes and more government regulations of the economy?
Yeah, I think we're going to have a lot of very polished marketing campaigns that sound as if it's coming from just from regular people when actually it's orchestrated by others. When I worked in state legislatures a few years ago with ALEC, we saw many instances in which you would see local communities trying to crack down on Airbnb and home share, and you have some of these marketing campaigns in opposition. Then you trace it back and you see, it's some organized interest groups that have it in their own personal business interests to stop those that own homes from renting those homes out. These weren't necessarily homeowners associations. These are other enterprises, businesses that were being hurt by people being able to rent out their rooms and rent out their homes. And I'm all for making money. I'm all for businesses succeeding, but you should not be using the power of the government to handicap your competitor. That is not right. And what's even more wrong is that when politicians willingly engage in such activity, it's not fair. It's also economically destructive. Regarding the gig economy, I wonder how many of these politicians that are trying to rein in these independent contractors, if they actually have a chance to talk to some of these drivers. I try to, in most cases, when I jump in an Uber a few times a week, to talk to folks. And I've met the vast majority are very happy with the arrangement they have. I've met people that are in school. I've met people that have kids at home that are trying to balance out schedules. I've met even a venture capitalist. Like I say, he was engaged in a new venture trying to raise capital, and he was doing this to go ahead and make ends meet while he was trying to succeed. This has been a boon, and the people that have been harmed, the businesses, were a lot of the ones that were in cahoots with their cities, the medallion companies, the cabs that they would go, the cab companies that would bid up these medallions for the right to operate. That's not real free markets. That's cronyism, and the gig economy has really upended that. And I think that's something we should all be thankful for.
Oh, and corporate licensure, and the medallions are a great example, because here are cabs who now have normalized the idea of the very thing that they're doing to Uber, which was, these guys are out there, and the government didn't want cabs getting around driving people all over the place without giving the government a cut somehow, and so they created the medallion system. So you are a licensed cabbie by the government, or a licensed hairdresser, or you name it. You can't accept money if you don't have the license from the government. So at the end of the day, Joel, what is the klaxon to think of? I mean, we have a president who never ran on being a fiscal hawk. He said during the campaign, I know how to work with debt. Debt's a tool. You can use debt as a tool and everything. So which is worth continuing with a president that understands how to work with debt, or a Bernie Sanders or an Elizabeth Warren who want to create these huge tax scams?
Well, look, when it comes to the debt, we've seen a failure by both Republicans and Democrats to address this problem. I've been disappointed repeatedly over the years, and including the last few years, with just the lack of an appetite to rein this in. And we are experiencing, fortunately, a record-long stretch of economic growth, but we are coming to a point where we are really going to be feeling this pain. I think we already are feeling it in ways we don't always realize. If you look at the hundreds of billions of dollars that are going to just pay the interest on the debt already.
Oh yeah.
Think about where those hundreds of billions of dollars could have gone.
And where they came from.
You've got investors investing in government debt instead of investing in private enterprise. And then you have hundreds of billions of dollars of annual taxes going to pay interest on those bonds rather than being left in the private economy to invest in more businesses. So we're already feeling that impact if you don't recognize it. But if you look at the warnings that left-wing economists, right-wing economists, government agencies, the Congressional Budget Office, you look at these studies and you see that we are heading to a debt cliff. Mm-hmm. And at some point in the not-so-distant future, some very difficult decisions are going to have to be made regarding how we're going to pay those costs for these programs that we refuse to reform. And there's going to be some very difficult decisions. And the longer we put off those decisions, the more difficult they become. If we act now, these are relatively modest changes. If we wait, they're going to be even more painful. And once again, I'll reference back to the work I was doing on the state level, because we saw this with states. We saw state pension plans where the legislature, the governor, would refuse to address the problem, or the city.
Yep.
And then the day of reckoning comes. Google San Jose, California, for information on that. Where
that was
the whole city, have to shutter libraries and lay off firefighters. if you address those problems early on, you can avoid those problems. And I hope that we'll see legislators come together in a bipartisan fashion to address those issues.
Well, Joel, it's we're out of time. Research fellow in financial regulations with the Heritage Foundation. Thank you so much for taking us on this wild tour of the wealth tax attacks and the Sanders and Warren, economic quote unquote plans. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you again very soon.
All right. Thank you.
You find them online at heritage.org. For all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, until next week, I'm Joe Thomas. So long, and thanks for all the fish.